I need your glory. I want your glory.
Canaan James was not a household name, but for those who knew him or even caught a glimpse of his talent, he was unforgettable. Born into a world where music was more than just a career, it was a way of life, Canaan had the kind of potential that made people stop and take notice. He was the son of country music legend Sammy Kershaw, and from a very young age he showed signs that he had inherited more than just his father's last name. He had his voice, his charm, and his love for the stage. Growing up in Nashville, Canaan was surrounded by music. He would sit backstage during his father's performances, watching in awe as the crowd sang along. By the time he was a teenager, it was clear that the spotlight was calling his name too. He began performing occasionally with his dad, and fans noticed. His smile, his voice, his presence, everything about him seemed destined for something big. But despite the natural gifts and the musical bloodline, Canaan wasn't chasing fame the way many children of celebrities do. He wasn't interested in being famous just for the sake of it. Those close to him say he was grounded, thoughtful, and focused more on making meaningful music than becoming a star overnight. He was the kind of person who would rather sit and talk about life for hours than pose for the cameras. Canaan also had a passion for storytelling. He wrote songs that reflected his feelings and experiences, and even though many never got released, they captured his soul. Some said he had an old soul, the kind of person who felt everything deeply, even if he didn't always show it. It was this emotional depth that made his music resonate with those who heard it. Even though his career was still in the early stages, those who worked with him in studios or saw him live knew that he was something special. He had a warmth to him that made people feel comfortable, a quiet confidence that never came off as arrogance. He was respectful, humble, and always willing to learn from others. As the world would later learn, there was more to Canaan than met the eye. While many saw the young man with potential and a famous last name, very few saw the inner battles he faced. His story, though filled with promise, would soon take a heartbreaking turn, and the world would be left asking, how could someone so full of light be taken so soon? Canaan James was more than just a son, more than a musician. He was a soul trying to find his place in the world, and the story of his life deserves to be told. When your father is one of the most recognized names in country music, people naturally expect you to follow in his footsteps. For Canaan James, that expectation came early. His father, Sammy Kershaw, rose to fame in the 1990s with a string of country hits that still get airplay today. Sammy's voice was one of grit and passion, and it seemed that Canaan inherited that same musical fire. But Canaan didn't want to simply be his father's echo. He wanted to be his own voice. Canaan grew up in a house where instruments were as common as furniture, and the sound of music flowed through every hallway. While other kids watched cartoons, he was watching sound checks. Instead of birthday parties at arcades, Canaan spent his special days at venues, side stage, watching professionals bring songs to life. It was in those moments that his love for music blossomed. He didn't just want to perform, he wanted to understand music. He asked questions about production, songwriting, mixing, and arrangement. He wanted to know the why behind every lyric and the how behind every chord progression. His curiosity was endless, and it became clear that he wasn't just trying to live up to a legacy, he was trying to build one of his own. By his late teens, Canaan began crafting his own sound. He wasn't confined to one genre. He dabbled in country, yes, but also explored rock, folk, and even a touch of blues. His voice carried emotion in a way that pulled listeners in. It wasn't overly polished or artificial, it was real. It was the kind of voice that made you stop what you were doing and listen. Canaan often joined his father for special performances. The chemistry between the two was undeniable. Fans adored seeing them together, and you could feel the pride in Sammy's eyes every time his son took the mic. But as much as he respected and loved his father, Canaan was determined to carve his own path, even if it was harder. In the studio, Canaan was serious and focused. Producers who worked with him spoke highly of his work ethic. He wasn't there to ride his dad's coattails, he wanted to earn his place in the industry. And he was well on his way. There were talks of a solo album, plans for small tours, and even a few collaborations lined up. The future looked bright, but as often happens with stories like these, there was an invisible weight pressing down on Canaan. While his musical legacy was something to be proud of, it was also something he sometimes felt trapped by. Living in the shadow of a giant can be inspiring, but it can also be suffocating. And deep down, Canaan was fighting battles that no one could see. Still, through it all, he kept making music. Because for Canaan James, music wasn't just a career, it was his escape. It was his therapy. It was his voice when words failed. From the outside, it seemed like Canaan James had everything going for him. A supportive father, a budding career, and a strong sense of purpose. But those who knew him best understood that carrying a legacy isn't always a gift. For Canaan, the pressure to live up to a famous last name came with an emotional toll that most people could never fully understand. Growing up as Sammy Kershaw's son had its perks: backstage passes, access to industry insiders, and a deep understanding of the music business. But with those advantages came enormous expectations. People expected him to be the next big thing. They assumed that success would come easy, simply because of who his father was. Yet, Canaan was constantly reminded that in this industry, nothing is guaranteed. Canaan often spoke privately about how hard it was to find his own identity. He respected his father's legacy, but he wanted to be more than just Sammy Kershaw's son. He wanted people to recognize his name for his own accomplishments, not just his bloodline. That need for individuality created a quiet storm inside him, a desire to be seen and heard on his own terms, yet the fear that he might never break out of his father's shadow. Friends said he carried that struggle quietly. He never wanted to seem ungrateful or disrespectful, but it weighed on him. Every comparison to his father, every suggestion that he had it easy, cut deeper than most realized. It wasn't just about music, it was about self-worth. He wanted to prove that he belonged in the spotlight not because of legacy, but because of talent and hard work. In interviews and conversations, he was always gracious, but you could sense a complexity behind his words. He would light up when talking about new music projects, but grow quiet when the topic shifted to his family or the expectations placed on him. It was clear that there were unspoken struggles, things he didn't want to burden others with. Mental health in the music industry is often overlooked. The constant pressure to perform, to stay relevant, to keep up appearances, it can take a toll on even the strongest individuals. For someone like Canaan, who felt deeply and thought deeply, those pressures could be overwhelming. Despite all this, he kept pushing forward. He kept writing, kept singing, and kept hoping that one day he'd step out from the shadow and into his own light. But behind the smiles and the music, Canaan James was a young man trying to balance the weight of legacy with the need to be truly seen. And the cracks were starting to show. Canaan James was good at hiding his pain. Like so many creative souls, he could channel his emotions into music. But when the music stopped, the silence could be deafening. To the outside world, he was a rising star. To those closest to him, he was a kind, thoughtful young man trying to make sense of his place in the world. But beneath the surface, signs of struggle began to show, and they were easy to miss if you weren't looking closely. Friends and family began to notice changes. He grew quieter, more withdrawn. His once lively energy started to dim. He was still writing, still performing, but there was something different. The light in his eyes had faded a bit, and the weight on his shoulders seemed heavier than ever. He wasn't just dealing with the stress of building a music career, he was battling something much deeper. Some said Canaan struggled with anxiety and depression, though he never publicly confirmed it. Those close to him said he was deeply sensitive and often overwhelmed by the pressure he put on himself. He wanted to be perfect, to make everyone proud, to live up to the dreams others had for him. But when you hold yourself to impossible standards, even small setbacks can feel like massive failures. He also started pulling away from the spotlight. Where once he would eagerly share new music or post on social media, he became more reserved. His online presence faded and rumors began to swirl. Some assumed he was just taking time to work on his music, but others worried that something was wrong. The truth is, he was likely battling demons that no one could fully understand. Canaan wasn't the type to open up easily. He smiled through the pain, kept things light in public, and rarely let others see the depth of his sadness. That made it even more difficult for those around him to help. When someone is good at hiding their hurt, it's easy to believe they're okay, even when they're not. Music had always been his therapy, his outlet, his way of processing the world. But at some point, even music wasn't enough. And that's the heartbreaking part of his story. Because behind the melodies and lyrics, behind the gentle smile and soulful voice, was a young man quietly crying for help. What comes next is even more painful, because Canaan James' story, full of promise and hope, was about to reach a tragic turning point. The music world was shaken to its core when the tragic news of Canaan James' passing reached the public. It seemed impossible. One moment, Canaan was planning new music, writing songs, and preparing for the next chapter of his career. And the next, he was gone. The cause of his death would eventually be revealed. But in the days immediately following the tragedy, the world was left in shock, struggling to process the loss of someone so full of potential. Family, friends, and fans were left reeling. Sammy Kershaw, Canaan's father, was devastated. Having raised his son through the highs and lows of a musical career, Sammy had always been proud of the man Canaan was becoming. They had shared the bond of music, but more importantly, they shared a deep father-son connection that no one could touch. Now, Sammy had to navigate the unthinkable, burying his own child. The heartache was unbearable. In the wake of his son's death, Sammy took some time to reflect on the many ways Canaan had impacted those around him. He was so much more than just my son. Sammy shared in a heartfelt statement to the media. He was a talent, a brother, a friend. His light was just beginning to shine, and now that light is gone. The reaction from the music community was equally heartbreaking. Many artists, producers, and colleagues who had worked with Canaan expressed their sorrow over the loss of such a promising talent. In the days following his death, tributes began pouring in from every corner of the industry. Whether it was a tweet from a fellow musician, a tribute video on social media, or heartfelt messages from fans, the common sentiment was the same. Canaan had left a mark on everyone he met. His fans, especially those who had followed his rise from the small gigs to his eventual studio recordings, were devastated. Many of them had been drawn to Canaan not just because of his music, but because of his authenticity. In an industry full of pretenders, Canaan had stood out as someone who wasn't just chasing fame. He was chasing a meaningful connection, and to have that taken away so suddenly was a blow to all who had admired him. The tragedy also sparked conversations about the pressures and struggles that come with being in the public eye. Fans and colleagues alike began to ask, could there have been signs they missed? Could they have done more to support him? The question lingered in the air, unanswered and painful. As the details of his death were revealed, it became clear that Canaan had been dealing with inner demons that no one had fully understood. His mental health struggles, though not widely known, had been a significant part of his life. Many who had been close to him knew that Canaan had dealt with anxiety and depression, but he had kept much of it private. Those closest to him now reflected on how hard he had fought to keep up appearances, often masking his pain with smiles and laughter. While the cause of his death was still under investigation, it was clear that Canaan's battle with mental health had been a factor. He had always been open about his struggles, though rarely in public. But in private, those who were closest to him knew that he had a weight on his shoulders, an invisible burden that, over time, had become too much to bear. In the days following the tragedy, people began to reach out to those who had known Canaan, offering their support to his family, friends, and anyone who had been touched by his music. But no words could bring him back, and the pain was something that would never fully heal. The music world had lost a star, but more than that, the world had lost a beautiful soul. Though Canaan's life was cut short, his music continued to live on. Those who had heard his songs before his passing found comfort in the recordings he left behind. For many, listening to his music became a way of remembering him, a way of feeling his presence again. In the years that followed, Canaan James became a symbol of the fragility of life and the importance of taking care of one's mental health. Canaan's passing wasn't just a loss for the music world. It was a stark reminder of how often the brightest lights are dimmed too soon. The question still lingered in the hearts of those who had known him. How could someone so full of promise, so much potential, be taken away before he could even truly shine? In the wake of Canaan James' untimely passing, the aftermath was a storm of grief, reflection, and unanswered questions. While the music world mourned the loss of an up-and-coming star, those who had known him personally found themselves grappling with a deeper, more intimate sadness. Canaan had touched so many lives in his brief time on Earth, and it was impossible to ignore the deep sense of loss that permeated every corner of his community. For his father, Sammy Kershaw, the pain was excruciating. As a father who had witnessed his son's rise in the music world, Sammy had every reason to believe that Canaan was on the brink of something extraordinary. Sammy's grief, however, was not just for the musical legacy that would never be fulfilled, but for the personal connection he had lost. Canaan was more than a son to Sammy. He was a friend, a companion on the road, and a partner in the music industry. The shared moments they had, whether on stage or backstage, laughing over old songs, would now be memories, and no one could have prepared him for the depth of that loss. The funeral for Canaan James was a somber event, attended by friends, family, and members of the music industry. It was clear from the outpouring of love and grief that Canaan had touched the lives of so many people. Fans and colleagues who had been fortunate enough to work with him in the early stages of his career spoke out about his authenticity, his kindness, and his dedication to his craft. His death left a hole in the music world that could never truly be filled. In the months following Canaan's death, conversations about mental health within the music industry began to shift. Canaan's struggles were no longer hidden behind the curtain of his personal life. His battle with anxiety and depression had become a part of his story, an integral part of the narrative that would define his legacy. Industry professionals, fans, and fellow musicians started to recognize how critical it was to create environments where artists could seek help, not only for their careers but for their mental well-being. Mental health discussions in the music industry had been taboo for far too long, and Canaan's passing served as a wake-up call. Artists who often live in the public eye were now encouraged to speak openly about their own struggles, to break free from the stigma that surrounded mental health, and to seek help when needed. Canaan's family and friends became vocal advocates for mental health awareness, using their platform to speak out against the pressures of the industry and the toll it can take on even the brightest stars. For many fans, Canaan's music became a way to remember him, an emotional journey that allowed them to connect with him even after his death. His songs, which once felt like personal reflections of his life, now carried even more weight. They became a testament to his talent, his soul, and the legacy he left behind. For those who had followed him from the beginning, his passing was not just the loss of an artist, but the loss of a friend who had shared his heart with the world. In the years that followed, Canaan James' name became synonymous with both heartbreak and hope. His story was not just one of a rising star whose life was cut short, it was a story of the quiet battles many face, the importance of mental health, and the need for compassion within the entertainment industry. The Canaan James Foundation, established in his memory, worked to support mental health initiatives within the music industry, ensuring that his legacy would help others who struggled with the same demons he had fought. The foundation's mission was clear: to offer resources, support, and education for artists, helping them understand the importance of caring for their mental well-being. It became a living tribute to Canaan's life and work, turning his tragedy into a source of healing and awareness for others. Though Canaan James' life was cut tragically short, his impact reached far beyond the short years he spent here. His music lives on, his story is shared, and his struggles have sparked an important conversation that continues to resonate in the industry today. For those who loved him, the pain of his loss will never fade, but through the legacy he left behind, Canaan James' name will forever be linked with change and the hope that the music industry and the world can become a more compassionate, understanding place for those who face similar battles.